It started on one of those quiet suburban mornings when the air feels too calm, like the world itself is holding its breath before a storm. My Mustang sat in the driveway, the same 1969 Boss 429 my father built with his bare hands, its candy apple paint catching the sunrise like molten fire. I'd spent the early hours wiping down the chrome, trying to keep peace with a neighborhood that thrived on control. Then the knock came, sharp, impatient, entitled. I opened the door to find HOA Karen herself standing there, a clipboard tucked under one arm and her overgrown ego under the other. Her son George slouched behind her, a smug grin pasted across his face like he'd already won something that wasn't his. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now, because you tell me, have you ever had someone so brazenly cross a line they forgot who they were dealing with? Karen's lipstick was the color of dried blood, and her smile was just as warm. "Mr. Dillon," she said, voice dripping with that false sweetness suburban tyrants perfect over decades of potlucks and power trips. "We've had concerns about that car. It's been sitting there for weeks. The bylaws are very clear about non-operational vehicles in public view." George's eyes locked on the Mustang's hood, hungry, twitching with greed. He wasn't interested in rules. He was interested in trophies. I kept my tone easy. "That car runs better than anything built this century." I watched her expression tighten. Karen Truman, 52, ex-realtor, HOA president for 6 miserable years, wasn't used to being challenged. Her authority came from fear, not respect, and she could smell defiance the way a shark smells blood. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "If it's operational, then move it. Otherwise, it'll be towed by week's end." George chuckled. "Or maybe you should sell it. Someone who actually appreciates it could put it to use." The arrogance of the boy hit like static. I recognized it. Unearned confidence, the kind that only grows under a parent who never says no. I stepped off the porch, wiping my hands on a rag still smelling of polish. "You like cars, George?" He straightened, unsure how to answer. "Then let me give you a piece of advice. Some things you earn, not take." Karen's face flushed crimson. "This discussion is over," she hissed. "You'll be hearing from the board." She turned on her heel, the click of her heels echoing down the driveway like gunshots. What she didn't know was that I'd already heard from the board. Every single complaint, every falsified fine, every neighbor she'd bullied into silence. I'd watched her little regime operate like a dictatorship wrapped in Christmas lights. And as she stormed away, clipboard clutched like a weapon, I realized something chilling. She wasn't just after control. She was after conquest. The following morning, I found an official notice taped to my door. Violation 8.3c, non-operational vehicle, subject to impoundment. The signature at the bottom was barely legible but familiar. Barry Jenkins, HOA treasurer, Karen's loyal lapdog. My coffee went cold in my hand. I'd been through enough bureaucrats in my life to know this wasn't about order. It was about power. By noon, the rumor mill was grinding. Neighbors whispered across driveways. Someone claimed my Mustang leaked oil. Another said it was abandoned property. I caught glimpses of Karen's red SUV cruising the block like a patrol car. George in the passenger seat smirking out the window. It wasn't subtle. It was intimidation dressed as regulation. But what they didn't know was that I'd faced worse than HOA Karen and her clipboard army. I'd stared down cartel negotiators, corrupt officials, and armed men with less arrogance than this woman wielded over lawn heights and mailbox paint. My badge was locked away in a drawer upstairs, but the training never left. I'd promised myself a quiet retirement, yet the same calm that kept me alive in the field started humming in my chest again, the kind of quiet that comes right before someone makes a very bad mistake. That mistake came 3 days later. I woke to the sound of tires crunching gravel and radios crackling. Through the blinds, I saw flashing lights painting the side of my house blue and red. 2 patrol cars, a tow truck, and in front of them, arms folded, stood Karen Truman in a blazer so bright it could blind satellites. She was smiling. I stepped outside in jeans and a t-shirt. No badge, no uniform. "Morning," I said evenly. "Something wrong?" She gestured dramatically to the car. "Officers, that's the vehicle. Stolen. Parked here illegally." My stomach tightened. Not from fear, but fury at the audacity. She had called 911. She had reported my car stolen. And she was standing there, watching the world bend to her delusion, convinced she could weaponize the system itself. One of the young officers approached, clipboard shaking slightly. "Sir, we received a report." I cut him off gently. "Mind if I see the report?" He hesitated, then handed me the copy. It was exactly what I expected. No van verification, no matching description beyond color and make. A rookie's mistake, or rather, a trap she'd built for one. Karen adjusted her sunglasses, gloating. "You see, Mr. Dillon, rules apply to everyone, even you." That's when I smiled. The kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "You're absolutely right." I reached into my back pocket, slow and deliberate, letting the sunlight catch the edge of my badge as it flipped open. The world froze. Silence dropped heavy on the driveway. The rookie's face drained to white. Karen blinked, her smirk faltering. You're Chief Dillon," I said quietly. "Of this county." Every ounce of her confidence evaporated. George's jaw hung open. The 2 officers straightened instinctively, hands dropping to their sides. I took one slow step forward. "Now, Mrs. Truman, you and I are going to have a little talk about false reports, misuse of emergency resources, and harassment." My tone never rose above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a gavel. She stammered something about misunderstanding, about enforcing community standards. I let her words hang there, hollow. The rain started, thin and steady, hissing on the hood of the Mustang. "You wanted the law, Karen," I said. "Congratulations, you've got it." The officers exchanged looks. One of them mumbled an apology before backing toward the patrol car. Karen's clipboard trembled. Her son's arrogance shriveled into silence. The only sound left was the rain ticking against metal. And as I stood there watching her realize the scale of her mistake, I thought, not for the first time, that bullies never expect consequences until they arrive wearing a badge. When I joined the force 3 decades ago, I thought justice was black and white. I thought people who broke the law were criminals, and those who upheld it were heroes. But years behind the badge taught me something else entirely. Power doesn't always come with a weapon. Sometimes it comes with a title, a meeting agenda, or a clipboard. The most dangerous tyrants I'd ever met didn't wear masks. They wore smiles. And that's exactly why I moved here. I wanted out of that noise. I wanted peace. But peace, I've learned, is just the calm between storms. I retired early. Not because I was tired, but because I was done fighting battles for people who didn't know the difference between justice and politics. The city had become a chessboard of favors and deals. So I sold the house, packed my things, and bought this place, a quiet corner lot surrounded by oak trees and a stretch of open road that reminded me of simpler days. My wife, Gina, said it was the first time she'd seen me sleep through the night in years. She was right. The silence out here wasn't empty. It was healing. That Mustang in the driveway wasn't just a car. It was the last thing my father ever gave me before he passed. The kind of man who believed in fixing what was broken instead of replacing it. I rebuilt that car bolt by bolt, not for show, but as a reminder of where I came from. To me, it was family history on 4 wheels. To HOA Karen, it was visual clutter. She saw it as an opportunity, a symbol to destroy so she could prove control. I first met her at an HOA meeting the month after I moved in. The room smelled like burnt coffee and power trips. Karen sat at the center of a long, folding table, papers stacked high, her posture straight as a ruler. Around her were the same types I'd seen in city boards my entire life. People who craved relevance in all the wrong ways. They called it a community board, but it felt more like a courtroom. I stayed quiet, observing. That's what years of interrogation work will do. You learn to watch before you speak. When they brought up aesthetic regulations, I could already sense where it was headed. Karen's tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp. "We've noticed some residents keeping vehicles visible from the main road," she said, voice smooth like poison in tea. "It creates a certain disorganization." The way she said residents told me she already had a target, and when her eyes flicked toward me for a fraction of a second, I knew I'd just become the next name on her list. See, Karen wasn't like most HOA presidents. She wasn't just hungry for order. She was addicted to dominance, the kind who built power by intimidation, the kind who smiled as she destroyed reputations. Her son George was just an extension of her ego, a spoiled, reckless shadow who used her authority like a weapon he didn't earn. Together, they were the kind of pairing that turned peaceful neighborhoods into battlegrounds. Now, most people here didn't stand up to her. They were too scared. They'd seen what happened to anyone who did. The Andersons had their patio ripped out over a color violation. The Thompsons were fined into foreclosure for non-compliant trash cans. Karen had connections, city clerks, developers, even a county inspector who owed her favors. She built her empire quietly, one threat at a time, until the whole neighborhood lived under her rule. But she made one mistake. She assumed I was just another retiree with a lawnmower and a bad back. She didn't know that before I wore the badge, I'd served 12 years in the military police, that I'd investigated fraud rings that made her little operation look like amateur hour, that I'd spent half my career dismantling systems exactly like hers, the kind that thrived on paperwork and fear. Gina saw it before I did. "She's baiting you," she said one evening as we sat on the porch. The cicadas hummed low, and the sky burned gold. "You can't give her what she wants." I sipped my coffee, watching Karen's SUV glide past like a shark fin slicing water. "I'm not giving her anything," I said. "I'm just waiting for her to make the first illegal move." Gina smiled faintly. "You're setting a trap." "No," I said quietly. "I'm giving her rope." In law enforcement, there's a saying, the loudest liar always writes their own confession. All you have to do is let them talk long enough. Karen's problem was that she didn't know when to shut up. Her arrogance wasn't confidence, it was exposure. Every time she opened her mouth, she revealed something, a connection, a motive, a weakness. All I had to do was listen. The next week, I started attending every HOA meeting, not as a participant, as a witness. I took notes, documented votes, memorized phrases. They laughed at first. Karen smirked whenever I raised an eyebrow. But by the third meeting, she stopped looking at me altogether. She could feel the shift. It's funny how fear looks on someone who's built their identity on causing it. It didn't take long to learn the hierarchy. Barry Jenkins, the treasurer, handled the money, a nervous man with a shaky hand and too many administrative errors. Their lawyer, Brenda Lewis, was more parrot than professional, repeating whatever Karen whispered. And then there was George. He didn't have an official title, but he acted like HOA royalty. He'd walk around the neighborhood filming cars, fences, and mailboxes like a wannabe code enforcer. Once, he even pointed his camera at my house and said, "Looks like a violation to me." I didn't respond. I just wrote it down. The night before the false police call, I spent hours going over my files. Digital copies of every notice, every recorded meeting, every fine that mysteriously doubled after appeal. It was all there. The patterns, the signatures, the forged approvals. I'd built case files faster than most detectives, because when you've spent a career reading lies, paper trails talk. Still, a part of me wanted to believe she'd stop, that she'd realize she'd gone too far. But tyrants don't retreat. They escalate. And when George started bragging online about taking that old cop's car, I knew the clock had started ticking. By dawn, I had every camera on the property recording, every document ready, every angle prepared. I wasn't looking for revenge, I was preparing for exposure. Because once people like Karen push too far, there's no pulling back. They don't stop until they self-destruct. That morning, when the police arrived and I showed my badge, I didn't just expose her to them, I exposed her to herself. She saw, maybe for the first time, that she wasn't invincible. That the law she'd twisted to terrorize her neighbors could turn just as easily on her. And that's the thing about authority. It doesn't care about your title. It only cares about truth. After the officers left, I went inside and poured another cup of coffee. Gina looked up from her laptop. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said, "but this isn't over." She frowned. "You think she'll try again?" I smiled. "I don't think, I know." And I was right, because by that evening a new notice appeared on my door. It wasn't about the car anymore. It was personal. By the time that second notice showed up, I wasn't surprised. What had surprised me was how bold she'd become. It wasn't even subtle anymore. It was pure, naked intimidation. Ongoing violations, subject to board review. Non-compliance will result in community enforcement action. No date, no code, no signature, just an anonymous threat wrapped in legal jargon. I stood there in the morning light, reading it while the sprinklers hissed across the lawn. Gina leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "She's escalating." I nodded. "She's losing control." Because that's what happens when people like Karen realize their intimidation isn't working. They start grasping at anything sharp, even if it cuts their own hands. It's funny, people think HOA power comes from laws or regulations, but it doesn't. It comes from fear. Fear of fines, fear of social exile, fear of being the next target. Karen had built her little empire on that fear. For years, she ruled with what she called community standards, but what she really meant was compliance through humiliation. She'd mastered the art of weaponized bureaucracy, the kind that looks legitimate on paper but collapses under the first real audit. When I was still chief, we used to call it civil tyranny. The most dangerous form of corruption wasn't violent, it was procedural. A forged signature here, a falsified vote there, and suddenly ordinary citizens were paying hundreds of dollars for crimes that didn't exist. The difference was, I'd spent my career dismantling those systems. I'd testified in federal hearings on racketeering cases where entire neighborhoods were bled dry under the illusion of homeowner improvement. And every time I saw it happen, it started with someone like Karen. I started digging deeper. My training made it easy. Paper leaves, fingerprints, even when it's digital. The HOA's website had a members portal, a small section where homeowners could view meeting minutes and payment history. It was sloppy, outdated, unsecured. Within an hour, I'd mapped out the entire power structure. Karen was the president, Barry Jenkins the treasurer, Brenda Lewis the legal counsel, and 2 other board members, both retirees who voted yes to everything. A 5-person monarchy with no accountability. The deeper I looked, the uglier it got. The HOA had processed over $47,000 in administrative fines in the last fiscal year, half of which had no listed violations. The treasurer's reports were missing supporting receipts. And the so-called bylaws Karen constantly quoted weren't even the latest approved version. She'd been amending them unilaterally, adding new clauses, striking out others, and then enforcing her rewritten rules retroactively. That wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. I printed copies, labeled every section, and began building a case file thicker than a city ordinance book. It wasn't about revenge, it was about exposure. And I knew that when it came time to move, I wouldn't need to shout or threaten. I'd let the evidence do the talking. Still, evidence without witnesses is just paperwork. So I started talking to the people she'd hurt. Quietly. Carefully. Mrs. Alvarez, the widow down the street, showed me a $200 late fee for a mailbox height violation. Her mailbox hadn't changed in 20 years. The Hendersons had been threatened with foreclosure over an unapproved fence color, one that matched the HOA's own specifications. Every story was the same: confusion, intimidation, silence. Karen's weapon wasn't law, it was exhaustion. The more I listened, the more I saw the pattern. She'd built her control like a pyramid scheme. Fines funded enforcement, enforcement funded expansion, and anyone who challenged her got buried under paperwork until they broke. She had her fingers in everything: landscaping contracts, maintenance approvals, even developer partnerships. The HOA had become less a community organization and more a private fiefdom. And at the top of it sat a woman who believed she was untouchable. Gina called it suburban dictatorship. She wasn't wrong. One night while we reviewed the financials together, she said, "She's not acting alone. Nobody moves this much money without help." I pointed to the treasurer's signature. Barry Jenkins. He's her banker and her liability shield. Every transaction runs through him. If she falls, he falls harder. Barry was the kind of man who mistook cowardice for caution. Always sweating, always nodding too fast when Karen spoke. I'd seen 1,000 Barrys in my time, the weak link who holds everything together until the pressure starts to crack him. I'd need him. Not yet, but soon. It wasn't long before Karen caught on that something had shifted. She stopped pretending to be polite. At the next HOA meeting, she went straight for the throat. "We've received reports," she said, eyes locked on me, "that certain residents are recording board sessions without authorization. That's a violation of privacy." I didn't blink. "Public meetings are protected under state open governance laws," I replied evenly. "You might want to review Section 1-8341. Her face twitched, just for a second. She didn't expect anyone to know the code, let alone quote it from memory. That's the thing about tyrants. They mistake obedience for ignorance. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to document her reaction. And the way she gripped that pen told me everything I needed to know. She was panicking. After the meeting, she cornered me in the parking lot. The mask dropped. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she spat. "You think you can walk in here and challenge me?" Her voice was low, venomous. I stepped closer, my tone calm. "Karen, I don't think anything. I just know the law." Her eyes flashed. "Then you should know how easy it is to lose everything when you stop following it." She turned on her heel, but not before I saw the shake in her hand. When I got home that night, Gina was waiting. "She threatened you, didn't she?" she asked quietly. "She tried." I poured myself a drink. "But threats only work if they scare you. I'm just taking notes." That's when Gina dropped the real bombshell. "You might want to check the county records," she said. "The HOA just filed a lien authorization template. Pre-approved, unsigned. If they push it through, they could claim any house they find." I stopped cold. That was extortion wrapped in legal disguise. It was a weaponized loophole, a way for Karen to bankrupt whoever she wanted under the guise of policy. And that was when I knew this wasn't about my Mustang anymore. It was about control of the entire neighborhood. The next morning I drove to the county office myself. The clerk there recognized me from my badge days and let me review the filings. The signature line was blank, but the submission came from Karen's email address. I had her digital fingerprint now. It was the first solid link between her personal authority and financial exploitation. One line item in a sea of paperwork, but it was enough to crack her empire wide open. That night, as the crickets chirped outside and the Mustang's chrome reflected the moonlight, Gina looked up from her screen and said, "You're not just living here anymore, Frank. You're investigating." I gave a tired half smile. Old habits die hard. She leaned back in her chair. "So what's next?" I looked at the stack of files on my desk, then at the photo of my father on the wall, the man who taught me that integrity doesn't bend under pressure. "Next," I said quietly, "we find the rest of her accomplices, and then we bring the whole damn thing down." Because the truth about HOA Karen was this: she wasn't just a woman enforcing rules, she was running a racket under the banner of community. And the thing about rackets is, once you trace the money, you can see exactly where the rot begins. Gina always said I could smell corruption before I saw it. She wasn't wrong. It's a kind of sixth sense that never leaves you, that tingle at the base of the neck when something on paper feels too clean. After I found that unsigned lien form, I knew I wasn't just fighting a neighborhood bully. I was looking at a white-collar operation that had grown fat on intimidation, and I was done playing defense. The next week became an operation. Not a hobby, not a curiosity, but an operation. I called it Project Ordnance. Every file, every note, every photo got a number. Gina handled the digital end, setting up encrypted storage, mirrored drives, and timestamps that would hold up in court. I focused on the tangible, hard evidence, chain of custody, verification. When you've spent decades testifying in courtrooms, you learn one truth. Evidence without procedure is just rumor. We started with the HOA's financial trail. Barry Jenkins' name appeared on every ledger, but the patterns didn't make sense. Disbursements labeled as maintenance reimbursements were paid to accounts that didn't match any known contractor. I pulled county tax filings, cross-referenced them against public business registries. Half the vendor names didn't exist. They were shells, placeholders for money, laundering. "Follow the ledger," I murmured one night, scanning another spreadsheet. Gina looked up from her second monitor. "Already on it. I found 5 payments, all recurring, all made to an LLC that was dissolved 2 years ago." She turned the screen toward me. "Guess who's listed as the signing officer before dissolution?" I leaned forward. "Don't tell me." "Oh, I'm telling you." She clicked. The name filled the screen in bold black type. George Truman. Her son, the same kid who couldn't tell a carburetor from a coffee mug, was the paper front for one of the HOA's fake maintenance companies. Payments were being funneled through him, disguised as reimbursements for community upkeep. It wasn't just corruption now, it was embezzlement. And with the right paper trail, it bordered on racketeering. I sat back, exhaling slowly. "We've got her." Gina smirked. "Not yet. We've got smoke. I want the fire." She was right. I needed to connect Karen's emails, Barry's accounts, and George's fake LLC under one common link. Something undeniable. So I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the County Records Department, disguised as a local journalist inquiry. Within 3 days, I had digital copies of HOA filings from the last 5 years, and buried deep in those PDFs was a signature pattern that made my blood run cold. Karen had forged votes, not once, not twice, but dozens of times. Every amendment to the bylaws, every fee increase, every land use adjustment, all approved by board consensus. except 2 of the board members she listed had been deceased for over a year. Forgery, fraud, misrepresentation, theft. 4 felonies, minimum. I'd seen men go to prison for less, but this wasn't about jail time. This was about stripping her power in front of the very people she'd terrorized. I didn't just want to stop her. I wanted her neighbors to see what she really was, a coward hiding behind paper shields. We needed one last piece, intent. Without proof that she knowingly orchestrated the scheme, her lawyer could argue negligence. I needed her voice. So I baited her. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening at the community center. I arrived early, placed my phone on the table, and started the recording app. Legally, one-party consent was all I needed. She walked in wearing that same smug smile, clipboard tucked under her arm like a badge of office. "Mr. Dillon," she said, "still attending our little gatherings? You must really enjoy the community spirit." I smiled. "Just keeping informed." She sat at the head of the table. "Good," she said sharply. "Then you'll understand why the board is escalating enforcement actions against residents who don't comply." "Such as?" Her eyes glittered. "Vehicles, paint colors, fences. We have to maintain order, don't we? People who don't follow the rules shouldn't live here." That was it. The tone, the arrogance, the complete self-justification. But then she went further, lowering her voice. "The truth is, fines keep the community strong. You'd be amazed what people will pay to keep their peace. And if they don't pay, well, their property becomes our problem, one way or another." She said it like it was nothing, a confession wrapped in a threat. I didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact, just said, "Interesting philosophy, Karen." She smiled. "It's not philosophy, Frank. It's management." When the meeting ended, I walked straight to my truck and backed up the recording to 3 cloud servers. I didn't even need to edit it. Her words spoke for themselves. Gina listened that night, her jaw tight. "She's not just corrupt," she said softly. "She's delusional. That's what makes her dangerous." We decided it was time to loop in someone else, someone who could give this investigation weight. I called an old contact from my department days, Sergeant Davis, a man I trusted with my life, now running the county's white-collar crimes unit. I told him I had a situation brewing in my neighborhood. Nothing official yet, but criminal in every sense. He met me at a diner off Route 12, same place we used to debrief after stakeouts. When I slid the folder across the table, he flipped through it quietly, expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up. "Jesus, Frank, this is bigger than HOA nonsense. You've got fraud, money laundering, maybe even RICO-level coordination here." I nodded. "I know. But I don't want this to turn into a circus. Not yet. I need her to think she's still in control." Davis leaned back, studying me. "You planning to play this out?" "I'm planning to end it the right way." He gave a slow grin. "God, I missed working with you." He agreed to help quietly. No official task force, no paperwork yet. Just a shadow ally. I handed him a USB with everything we'd found. The forged minutes, the shell LLCs, the payment logs. He promised to cross-check them against the state contractor database and financial crime unit records. Back home, Gina and I watched the neighborhood like hawks. Strange vehicles started appearing. Unmarked trucks, men checking meters that didn't exist, neighbors whispering about anonymous HOA inspectors. It wasn't paranoia. It was surveillance. Karen was getting nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. Sure enough, the next evening, an HOA maintenance van parked across from our driveway. I recognized the logo, the same fake company registered under George's name. I stepped outside, phone in hand. 2 men in reflective vests pretended to inspect a streetlight. "Evening," I said casually. "You boys lost?" They froze. One of them muttered something about routine checks. I smiled thinly. Funny, because I happen to know the city's contracted maintenance vendor. And it's not you. I snapped a photo of the license plate. They peeled off within seconds. That plate number led to another discovery. The same plate had been used by multiple contractor vehicles across 3 counties. It was part of a rotating fleet registered under a holding company called Oakwood Development Group. The same name Karen had mentioned at an HOA meeting months ago, boasting about future expansion partnerships. The web was closing. I called Davis again. Run this name for me, Oakwood Development Group. He went quiet on the other end. You sure you want me to? Do it. An hour later, he called back. Frank, Oakwood's been under state investigation for real estate fraud. Kickbacks, illegal rezoning, stolen equipment, the works. If your HOA's dealing with them, you're sitting on a gold mine of criminal evidence. That's when the full picture hit me. The fines weren't the endgame. They were the gateway. Karen and her board were financially strangling homeowners, pushing them into liens, and then coordinating with Oakwood to scoop up properties at foreclosure auctions for pennies on the dollar. They weren't enforcing order. They were manufacturing collapse. I stared out the window that night, rain streaking the glass, watching the reflection of the Mustang in the driveway. My father's car had survived 50 years of rust, weather, and neglect. But what it couldn't survive was someone like Karen Truman thinking it was hers to take. I wasn't going to let that happen. Tomorrow, I told Gina quietly, we go from defense to offense. She didn't even look up from her keyboard. Already ahead of you. She'd pulled public access to the HOA's internal email server using a forgotten admin password she'd recovered from cached code on the website. Within hours, she had hundreds of messages, enough to map communication between the board and Oakwood executives. It was digital gold. One thread stood out. Subject line, Phase 4 Acquisition Targets. Attached was a spreadsheet listing 8 homeowner addresses, mine included. Under each, the word, enforce. I stared at the screen, my pulse steady, the old instinct returning. Years of leadership training, tactical planning, and federal coordination locked back into place like a weapon loaded and ready. She'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. When the enemy gets desperate, they stop pretending. And by the time I reached the confrontation phase with Karen Truman, she'd shed every ounce of civility she'd ever worn. Her emails became threats. Her community notices became warnings. And her son, that arrogant little reflection of her entitlement, had started parading around the neighborhood like a junior enforcer, recording license plates and whispering to neighbors about infractions. It wasn't fear she was spreading anymore. It was chaos. The following week, 3 separate residents found official HOA warnings taped to their doors. Except the HOA's seal at the top was pixelated, and the fine amounts weren't even numbers anyone could pay online. They were intimidation letters printed at home. Sloppy, amateur, desperate. Gina and I watched from our porch that evening as Karen's SUV crawled past for the 3rd time. Her headlight swept across the driveway like a searchlight, pausing just a second too long on the Mustang under its cover. I sipped my coffee, steady, waiting. Gina glanced at me. You could end this tonight, she said. 1 call to Davis, and she's done. I shook my head. Not yet. Because you don't just take down people like Karen. You expose them. You make them show the world exactly who they are. Only then do you move. The next morning, the escalation hit a new level. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing, a message from Tony, my neighbor down the street. You need to see this. Attached was a picture, a post on the HOA's social board. My name, my address, my car, and the caption. Resident in violation of multiple community codes. Non-compliance under review. Expect enforcement visit. That wasn't an HOA notice. That was a public hit list. By noon, half the neighborhood had seen it. I started getting looks, the kind people give when they're afraid to be next. The old me might have stormed into that HOA office and put my badge on the table. But that's what she wanted. A public confrontation she could twist into a story about an aggressive resident. I'd spent a lifetime watching criminals weaponize perception. I wasn't about to give her the chance. So I went quiet. Silence unnerves tyrants. They thrive on reaction. When you take that away, they start unraveling. Karen doubled down. Her next move was harassment by proxy. A city inspector showed up at my house 2 days later. Anonymous complaint about structural changes. He looked exhausted before he even knocked. "Sorry, Mr. Dillon," he said, flashing his badge. "We get these all the time from your HOA president." I smiled faintly. "Just doing your job, son. Come on in." He did his walkthrough, checked the permits, found nothing. Before he left, he looked around and lowered his voice. "Between you and me, she's called this office 6 times this week. We flagged her number for abuse." That was my opening. Not yet a strike, but a pressure point. I logged it. Date, time, case number, evidence. Then came the media, or rather Karen's version of it. A week later, a local Facebook page, the Willow Creek Watchdog, posted an article written by Anonymous Concerned Resident. The headline, "Retired Officer Intimidates HOA President." It was littered with false quotes, fake incidents, and a blurry photo of me carrying groceries into my house, as if that was some act of menace. Gina laughed when she saw it. "She's turning this into a PR war," she said. "Good," I replied. "That means she's scared." I'd seen this before, in every case where someone cornered by truth tried to turn the narrative. Karen was setting the stage for her downfall, and she didn't even know it. Because every slander, every fake notice, every digital post was another piece of traceable data. IP addresses, timestamps, email headers. Gina was collecting all of it. Meanwhile, Sergeant Davis's quiet investigation was turning up results. He called one night from his unlisted number. "Frank, we traced those shell accounts. They're tied to Oakwood's development fund. You're sitting on a financial snake pit." "I figured as much. What's the timeline?" "Couple more days. We're building the warrants. But I'll tell you right now, you keep baiting her, she's going to hand you everything you need." He was right, and the bait was already in motion. That Friday, I attended another HOA meeting. The tension was thick. Every seat was filled, neighbors whispering as I walked in. Karen sat at the center again, chin high, eyes burning. She called the meeting to order with the usual self-righteous tone. "Before we begin," she said sharply, "I'd like to address certain rumors being spread by a few residents, including one who seems to think he's above our rules." All eyes turned to me. I didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her. Her jaw tightened. "Mr. Dillon, as of today, you are in violation of Code Section 8, Paragraph 3, Subsection C. Again." I smiled slightly. "The bylaw you illegally amended without board approval or state filing?" Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen's face flushed red. "That's an outrageous accusation." "No," I said calmly. "It's a verifiable fact, and I have the county record to prove it." You could have heard a pin drop. Even Barry looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. I let the silence hang just long enough before I continued. "Now, Karen, I'm not here to argue. I'm here to help you understand that you've crossed into federal territory. Fraudulent amendments, forged approvals, illegal lien threats. You're no longer playing HOA games, you're committing felonies." Her voice broke for the first time. You can't talk to me like that." "I just did." She slammed her pen down. "You don't know who you're dealing with." I stood up slowly, towering over the table. My voice stayed low, measured. That's the problem, Karen. You don't know who you're dealing with. The air shifted. Authority has a weight, and in that moment she felt it. She saw it in my eyes, the unflinching steadiness of someone who's seen real power abused, and worse, ended it. Before she could respond, I added, and before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now, because what happens next isn't just about rules, it's about justice. Every head turned. Phones started recording. I let her see that. I wanted her to. The next day, retaliation came like clockwork. My mailbox was stuffed with fake citations. My driveway was chalked with violation markers. A drone hovered over my yard for 20 straight minutes, but none of it mattered anymore, because now it was all documented under an active investigation. Davis had filed preliminary notices to secure electronic data from the HOA's accounts. Karen's every digital move was now evidence. That night, as rain hammered the roof, Gina turned her monitor toward me. "You need to see this," she said. On screen was an email thread between Karen and an Oakwood executive. Subject: Next phase, acquisition approval. In it, Karen bragged about neutralizing the resistance. My name was highlighted in bold. I leaned in, reading every word. She thinks she's above the law. Gina's voice hardened. Then show her what the law looks like when it bites back. And that's exactly what I did. The next morning, I made a call to the county postmaster, an old friend from my federal liaison days. I told him about the mail tampering, the public posting of addresses, and the forged notices. Within hours, the Postal Inspection Service, federal jurisdiction, had opened an inquiry. Now, Karen wasn't just facing civil liability. She was under federal observation. By the following week, strange cars weren't just watching me anymore. They were watching her. Neighbors began whispering, not about my Mustang, but about Karen's sudden visits from men in suits carrying clipboards. The balance of power was shifting. The same fear she'd used to control others was coming back for her. Then came the breaking point. A certified letter arrived at my door, signed by Barry Jenkins, on behalf of the HOA board. It declared that my property was subject to seizure pending violation review. It was the boldest lie yet, an outright illegal threat of asset forfeiture. I didn't even open my mouth. I just scanned it, logged the metadata, and forwarded it to Davis. 2 days later, he called me. "Frank, the DA's office has the file. This is going to blow wide open." I looked out the window at Karen's SUV parked across the street. "Good," I said. "Make sure she sees the lights when they come." And that's when it happened. The quiet before the storm broke. The neighborhood, for years silenced by fear, started to talk. People shared their own finds, their own notices, their own stories. The illusion cracked, and the woman who'd ruled this place like a dictator found herself surrounded by the one thing she couldn't control: the truth. The media came next. This time not her fake articles. Real reporters. Real cameras. The headline that hit the local news 3 days later said it all. HOA president under investigation for fraud and intimidation. Karen's SUV didn't leave her driveway for a week. But this wasn't over, because tyrants don't die quietly. They fight until the last breath. And when she made her final move, it wasn't against my car or my property. It was against me personally. Karen's last mistake was thinking she could corner a man who spent 3 decades dismantling people like her for a living. The night the local news aired her name, her mask began to slip. But instead of retreating, she doubled down. She sent out one final HOA-wide message, dripping with self-righteous venom. Certain residents are spreading false accusations that endanger the reputation of this community. These actions will have consequences. I almost laughed. Consequences? She didn't know the meaning of the word, but she was about to. That morning I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Sergeant Davis. "It's time," I said simply. He didn't ask what I meant. He knew. The second was to the state attorney's office, specifically the Real Property Crimes Division. The third was to the Federal Housing and Urban Development Fraud Desk, a department I'd helped establish years earlier when I was still wearing a badge. I knew exactly which forms to file, which agency handled which infraction, and which statutes Karen had violated. Within 24 hours, I'd submitted a 146-page case package. Every document, every digital trail, every recording, cataloged, indexed, and cross-referenced. I didn't embellish a single line. The facts were more damning than fiction could ever be. Then I sat back and waited. But waiting didn't mean sitting idle. Gina and I kept watching, documenting every panicked move Karen made. Her son, George, became her courier, delivering envelopes, shredding papers, running errands late into the night. That's what arrogance does to people. It convinces them they can outrun exposure by outpacing their own guilt. 2 days later, Davis called. "You've started a wildfire, Frank. The feds are in. The county's opening a fraud task force. The DA wants a statement from you by Monday." "Good," I said. "Make sure they start with Barry Jenkins." Barry was the linchpin, the treasurer, the signature man, the accountant of every dirty dollar that flowed through that HOA. And sure enough, when the subpoenas hit his doorstep, he cracked like wet plaster. I watched from my window as unmarked sedans pulled up outside his home. Quiet, efficient, no sirens. 2 agents went in. Barry came out 10 minutes later, pale and shaking, clutching a folder. By the next morning, he'd signed a cooperation agreement. He handed over everything: internal memos, secret ledgers, even screenshots of Karen bragging about outmaneuvering the law. Davis called again that afternoon. "Your treasurer friend just buried her. Turns out Karen's been skimming community funds into a private account for years. She even paid for her son's college tuition through an HOA development scholarship." "Of course she did," I said quietly. "And get this," he continued. "The same account made payments to Oakwood Development. Under the memo line, partnership incentives. We've got wire transfers, timestamps, signatures, all of it. She's done." I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Then it's time for the final act." We coordinated it like a federal sting. Everything had to be airtight, procedural, legal, indisputable. The warrants were filed simultaneously across 4 offices: the HOA headquarters, Oakwood Development's regional branch, Barry's house, and Karen's residence. No warning, no knock. The press didn't even get wind until the first agents were already inside. Gina watched it unfold from her laptop, live feeds pouring in from local news helicopters. "They're at her place," she whispered, eyes wide. Karen's reaction was predictable: outrage first, denial second. She stormed onto her lawn in a bathrobe, screaming about her rights as federal agents sealed off her property. The neighbors stood behind their fences, watching in stunned silence. For years, she'd humiliated them with her clipboards and fines. Now she was the one being cataloged, her world shrink-wrapped in evidence tape. I didn't go outside. I didn't need to. I'd already seen this scene too many times before, pride bleeding into panic. The sound of her voice through the open window was almost cinematic. "This is illegal. I am the HOA." That's the thing about dictatorships. They die the moment their subjects stop believing in them. By evening, the community center was sealed off. Investigators wheeled out boxes of documents, hard drives, and her personal computer tower, the same one she used to send every harassing notice. Davis texted me a photo from the scene. Operation Clean Slate complete. It was done. But for me, the real satisfaction didn't come from her arrest. It came from what happened next. The aftermath, the cleanup, the quiet restoration of order. The next week, the county court appointed a receiver to take control of the HOA. Karen's name was scrubbed from every legal filing. Barry's plea deal went public. Oakwood's executives were indicted on conspiracy charges. And as for George, he tried to play the victim, claiming his mother forced him to help. The jury saw right through it. Still, I didn't celebrate. I'd seen enough justice to know it isn't loud. It's procedural. It's relentless. It's patient. Gina found me in the garage that evening, sitting beside my father's Mustang. The red paint gleamed under the low light. She sat on the stool next to me, silent for a long moment. "You did it," she said finally. "No," I replied softly. "We did it. And we did it right." She smiled faintly. "You think she'll ever understand what went wrong?" I looked toward the driveway, where the streetlights cast long shadows across the empty road. People like her never understand. They think they're enforcing order when they're just spreading rot. And when someone finally calls their bluff, they call it persecution. We sat there in silence, listening to the hum of the night. It was the first true peace the neighborhood had felt in years. No drones, no notes, no headlights creeping by. Just quiet. But there was still one thing left to do. The following morning, I attended the emergency community meeting. For the first time in years, it wasn't run by fear. No clipboards, no rehearsed agendas, just residents sitting in folding chairs, looking lost but hopeful. The interim receiver, a calm, gray-haired attorney named Marissa, stood at the front and said, "We're rebuilding this association from the ground up. Anyone who is fined, threatened, or harassed will have their cases reviewed and their money returned." Applause broke out. Some people cried. And when she asked for nominations for the new board, something unexpected happened. Tony, the same neighbor who'd been fined for his garden gnome, raised his hand. "I'll do it," he said, "but only if we all promise. No more tyrants. Ever." Everyone laughed, clapped, nodded. For once, it felt like a community. When the meeting ended, a few neighbors came up to me, shaking my hand. "Didn't know you were a cop," one of them said. I smiled. "Retired now." Another asked, "So what'll happen to her?" "She'll face her consequences," I said simply. "And this time the paperwork will be real." As the crowd thinned, I stepped outside, the sunlight warming the concrete. For the first time since we'd moved in, the air felt normal. No tension, no eyes watching from behind curtains. Just life moving on. That night, Gina and I opened a bottle of wine. She leaned against me, her voice low. "You realize you didn't just stop her. You taught this entire neighborhood what accountability looks like." I chuckled softly. "I just reminded them the law still means something, even here." Because that's the truth people forget. Power doesn't corrupt when it's watched. It corrupts when no one's brave enough to look back. And for the first time in a long time, Willow Creek was finally looking forward to it. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through courtrooms, carries across gossip, and settles into the ground like rain after a fire. The headlines came first. HO president charged in multi-county fraud scheme. Local developer implicated in HOA conspiracy scandal, and the one that made the front page of the county paper, police chief exposes HOA racket from within. I never spoke to reporters. I didn't need to. The truth didn't require my commentary. It was written in every indictment, every confession, every neighbor's sigh of relief. Karen's empire wasn't just gone. It had been dismantled brick by brick, file by file, word by word. The trial came fast. Barry Jenkins, the treasurer, testified under a plea deal. He described the entire operation in excruciating detail. The fake maintenance companies, the embezzled HOA fees, the property seizures, And finally, the kickbacks from Oakwood Development. His voice cracked when he said Karen's name. "She told us it was all legal," he said. "She said nobody would ever look this deep." They did. Karen sat at the defense table in a gray suit instead of her usual blazer and pearls. Her hair was flat, her face drawn, her once smug expression hollowed out. Even George, her son, her prized weapon of entitlement, wouldn't meet her eyes. The moment the judge read "guilty on all counts," she didn't cry. She just stared forward, blank, like the concept of losing was foreign to her. 10 years. That was the sentence. Fraud, forgery, and criminal conspiracy. Oakwood's executives got more. Barry got probation and witness protection. George got a few hundred hours of community service, under the supervision of the very people his mother used to fine. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to. I spent that day on my porch, watching the mail truck roll by without slowing down. No fines, no fake notices, no threats, just normal life. Gina came outside with 2 mugs of coffee, handing me one. "You did it," she said. I shook my head. We did it, and this time everyone saw it. A week later, the county officially dissolved the old HOA. A new one formed, smaller, transparent, volunteer-run. No secret accounts, no hidden bylaws, no clipboards. Tony, the handyman neighbor who'd lost his truck, was elected president by unanimous vote. At the first meeting, he smiled and said, "Let's do this right. No rulers, just neighbors." The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was genuine, a sound of release, of reclaiming something stolen. As months passed, Willow Creek changed. Lawns that had once been perfect and lifeless grew a little wild, full of color again. Kids played in driveways without being told they were out of bounds. The air felt lighter. The fear that once sat in every window had vanished. One afternoon, I stood by my garage with Tony, showing him how to use a torque wrench. He grinned, wiping sweat off his brow. "Can't believe I'm learning car stuff from a police chief," he said. "Retired," I corrected. He laughed. "Still, not many neighborhoods can say the guy next door took down the entire HOA from the inside." I smiled. "Let's just say I'm better at paperwork than I look." That night, Gina and I finally uncovered the Mustang. The candy apple red gleamed under the setting sun. The same car that had started it all. I leaned against it, hand on the cool metal, thinking about my father. About the man who'd built it with his hands, who taught me that integrity wasn't about who's watching. It's about doing what's right even when they aren't. "You gonna drive it again?" Gina asked softly. "Yeah," I said. "But this time I'm not running from noise. I'm driving toward peace." She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "He'd be proud, you know." "I think so," I said quietly. "He always said a man's real horsepower isn't under the hood. It's in his backbone." We stayed there as the crickets started singing. The kind of peace you can't buy or legislate. The kind that only comes when you've earned it the hard way. Weeks later, I got a letter from the state. The HOA case had officially been cited in a new training manual for community fraud prevention, a model for how small-town corruption can hide in plain sight, and how one resident with the right knowledge can take it apart. They called it the Dillon Standard. I laughed when I read that. I wasn't a hero. I was just a man who refused to be intimidated by paperwork and power suits. But if that meant other people stood up when their own Karens came knocking, then maybe it was worth every sleepless night. A few days after that, I was walking to the mailbox when I noticed something new. A group of kids racing their bikes down the street, laughing, free. One of them had taped a piece of paper to his handlebars, a drawing of a red car with the words "Chief's Mustang" scribbled underneath. I stopped and smiled. That, more than any verdict or article, was victory. Because what Karen never understood, what people like her never do, is that authority isn't control, it's responsibility. Power isn't meant to rule, it's meant to protect. And when it's abused, the real enforcers aren't the ones with badges. They're the ones who refuse to back down. I glanced one last time at the sign on our street. Willow Creek Estates. The same letters she once claimed as her kingdom. Now it was just a neighborhood, imperfect, loud, alive. Gina came out onto the porch, her voice warm. "You ready to go for that drive?" I smiled, sliding the keys from my pocket. "Always." The Mustang's engine roared to life, deep and familiar. As I pulled onto the street, the neighbors waved. I gave a small salute out the window. Somewhere behind me, the past finally stayed where it belonged, buried, quiet, and powerless. And for the first time in years, the only law that mattered on that street was peaceful.